All right, welcome everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, depending where you are. Just want to say thank you all for tuning in for our third webinar in our youth series this year. So today we're going to be discussing employing youth in 2022 and what the young worker looks like and what we're hearing, what they're feeling, and what they really need from their employers. So today, my name is Allison Watson. I'm Senior Research Director out of our Edmonton office with Leger, and I'm joined today again by my colleague, Nicholas Lopez. Nick, did you want to take a minute to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Allison. My name is Nicholas Lopez. I'm a research director with the Public Affairs and Communications team in Toronto.
Thanks, Nick. So Nicholas and I presented the Being a Young Citizen in 2022 a couple of weeks ago. And for those of you who are back, thank you for tuning in again. And this next slide will not be anything new for any of you who have been on our previous webinars. So every year with the youth study, we obviously target youth. So millennials and Gen Zers. And this year we spoke to just over 3,000 millennials and Gen Zers, specifically 2,000 millennials and 1,000 Gen Zs. There's a few stats on the bottom about who they're looking like, some of their kind of key demographics that we always find interesting to kind of focus on and see results by. So we see mother tongue, visible minorities, where we're seeing 25% identifying, 43% of youth today are identifying with religious affiliation, and then 16% are members of the LGBTQ2S+ community. So what are some of the things that we want to focus on in regards to youth in the labor market and their perceptions of the labor market? So we're going to go over a few things, and we won't go into too much of it right now, but very high level. Right now, we're seeing 4 generations working together in the labor market, all with very different values, needs, and expectations. Millennials really shook things up. Their values are different, their needs are different, and who they trust is different. We're seeing the labor shortages, and specifically right now, the Great Resignation. And the power really has appeared to shift, at least in perspective of the millennials, from employer to employee, that now they're feeling that they have more power than their employer. And for those employers that are on the call today, it's really time to warm up and get limber, because flexibility is going to be the key in attracting and retaining young employees, which I'm sure won't shock anyone. I mentioned the 4 generations. So who are the 4 generations? We present this slide in each one of our webinars. I won't go over it in too much detail as we have in previous years or previous iterations of the webinars, but these are the 4 groups of employees that we're currently working together, trying to meet the needs of, trying to really make a cohesive work culture and environment that will attract and retain each one of these demographics, which is very difficult to do considering there's such varying perceptions, views, needs, expectations, and values among all 4 of these generations, which we'll get into as we go through the presentation. So a few interesting stats that we were able to pull out, kind of highlighting the labor shortage and why we feel that this is just the beginning. For all of these stats actually were taken from an article that was published on CTV, or by CTV, sorry, on October 5th, 2021. So over 700,000 job vacancies were recorded in the second quarter of 2021. And then that's from StatsCan. We're seeing the largest increases in vacancies in Quebec, Ontario, and British Columbia. 30.3% of Canadian businesses report labor shortages. So sectors that have been able, what we're finding as well is that sectors that have been able to shift to a work from home model, so finance, insurance, real estate, these sectors have seen substantial job growth actually. They're less impacted because of their ability to pivot and be more flexible. While sectors that rely on physical presence, while not any fault of their own, but those sectors such as accommodation and food services, transportation, and recreation and tourism still have quite a ways to go to recover from the impacts that COVID has placed upon the labor market. In terms of the largest job vacancies that we're seeing those in hospitality and food service, healthcare, manufacturing and construction, retail, trade, and trucking. So the younger generations know their value. So I mentioned in the beginning that we're seeing that shift in power. So what does this mean? Why do we say that? We're really seeing that millennials feel that they don't need you. And by you, we obviously mean employers, but we find that 64% of Gen Zs and millennial workers feel their employer is more dependent on them than the other way around. And we're seeing this higher among the stable millennials, so those that are between the ages of 30 and 39 years old. And interesting enough, also among the carefree, so the younger millennials, the 15 to 19 years. Now, these perceptions can be different for many reasons. Perhaps the stable, they've been working a bit longer, they perhaps have maybe a little bit more confidence in their worth or their ability, a little bit more experience in the workforce. And perhaps the carefree are more influenced by what they're seeing in regards to the labor shortages, what they perceive their future to be, and maybe a little bit of naivety coming into play there as well. The whole bye-bye boss. So the great resignation, not going to surprise anybody, something that we're really strongly seeing right now. In the survey, when we asked our millennials, do you value more or do you believe that you'll be able to find a new job if you were to leave tomorrow or easily, where 66% indicate that they do believe they would be able to find a new job easily if they lost their current job. And that's consistent among all millennials, irrespective of their age. So what are some reasons that this could be? Now, Nick's going to touch on it, and we'll touch on it a little bit more down the road here. But what we're finding is 2 in 5 millennials are not considering pursuing a career in the job they're currently at. So the employees that you have, 2 in 5 of them already have 1 foot out the door. We also find 2 in 5 don't believe that they're being paid what they're worth. So perhaps this could be driving some of their hesitation. Maybe they don't feel valued in regard to one of our biggest motivators to work, because let's just face it, none of us work for free. So in summary here, we're finding that the young worker is independent from their employer, and the balance of power favors the employee rather than the employer.
Great. Thanks, Allison. So one of the things we spoke about in our first webinar, which was about young people and kind of them in terms of them being as citizens, is the deterioration of kind of that linear path in life. Previous generations were able to, graduate, enter the job market right away, and be able to kind of check off those life milestones, starting a family, buying a home. For younger people, we talked about how that isn't the case. They're more likely to go back to school, start a new career, reskill, upskill, do a bunch of different things instead of that linear, straightforward path. And that kind of trickles down to what we're seeing in terms of the breakdown of work hours. This traditional model of being able to show up 9 to 5, clock in, clock out, is something that for young people, they don't really want to be a part of anymore. We're seeing a major disruption in terms of how young people approach work. And this isn't to say that they're not working less, they're working just as hard, just differently. And there are a couple of factors I think that play into this. One of them being globalization. We have borderless teams across multiple different time zones. And so being able to check in with colleagues, outside of your own work hours later in the evening is something that a lot of younger people are more kind of conditioned to do. They've been working in that kind of global environment longer than some of the older generations. But I think the second factor in this has certainly been kind of COVID and kind of the explosion of remote work. It's given back a lot of time to young people who might have been commuting or just have extra hours in the day as a result. So for example, work hours might look like, working out in the morning, doing some task-oriented work throughout the day, taking a break with Netflix, going to happy hour, and then returning to work kind of in the evening hours to kind of clean up some stuff that they want to get ahead on for the next day or some major projects that they're working on. So I think this shift away from the traditional model kind of really speaks to and gets at what young people are looking for when they're looking to join an employer. They're looking for a certain degree of flexibility, and we'll get into that as well and cover how to approach that kind of flexibility as an employer. And so Allison kind of touched on this in some of the upfront slides, but I think the key point that we want to stress here is the 2 and 5 that are looking to pursue a career elsewhere. They don't want to pursue a career where they currently work. So what does this mean for young people? What does this mean for employers? It signals to me that they're less loyal. They're more focused on getting what they want, ensuring that the arrangements with their employer, they're seeing, benefits outside of kind of just a good salary and, a career path. There's more intangible things that they're after. And I think that is really important in the context of kind of this great resignation discussion. With so many people willing to leave, you have to ask yourself, what are we doing to retain individuals? When we're looking at the competition, and I guess, we can frame that competition within the job market itself. So different companies looking to get more talent or get new talent, 40% feel that the professional life trajectory has changed due to COVID-19. And that realization, I think, stems from people looking inwardly, young people looking inwardly about what they want out of an employer, what they want out of a job. Everybody has experienced varying degrees of stresses as a result of the pandemic and working from home, and young people more so in some cases, given the fact that there isn't a real sense of stability for young people. We see this kind of in those turbulent years, the 20 to 29-year-olds who are really trying to figure out what their trajectory in life is. They're less likely to kind of feel that sense of security. And so they want to be more mobile. They're less loyal to organizations. So that retention discussion really comes to the forefront here. And when we look at kind of that long-term planning, I think, the stats on this page kind of speak to that and kind of contrast each other a little bit. 75% of young folks, they like their current job. I mean, I think that's a really good, indicator of what young people currently at this time feel with their employer, but 25% intend to leave their job in the next year. And this is higher among that turbulent group, the 20 to 29-year-olds, the 30% saying yes there. And I think part of this kind of short-term perspective, not wanting to build a future at a company, not wanting to, stay at a company for a long period of time, really speaks back to some of our earlier webinars about just not feeling secure at their current stage in life. 20 to 29-year-olds have so much change happening in their lives at any given point that it's hard to plan for a future when you just don't feel secure. So in this case here, that short-term perspective really comes to the forefront about what are the immediate changes they're willing to make in their lives. And for employers, you have to balance and trying to figure out what degree can we respond to, what degree can we respond to this? How can we respond to this? What are the changes we can make on our end to ensure that we have that kind of retention happening and we're not facing that kind of organizational change constantly? So, you might want to wonder why so many young people are thinking about leaving, and there's a massive degree of distrust, I think, around traditional institutions. Alice and I touched on this kind of in our citizenship discussion around some of those key institutions like political parties, government. The same extends toward kind of large corporations and public companies. Only 31% of young people have confidence in them. And so where does that distrust, I guess, come from? There's this perception that companies, whether they be, public or private, have hierarchical structures. They lack kind of that consideration for employees. They find it difficult to advance in the workplace. They don't feel like they're making a difference. So if companies don't allow individuals to advance, there is a sense that they're not feeling a part of the team or contributing to some larger goal. And I think this is important to also keep in mind, is that, we're confronting this perception that, we can't be trusted as an employer. How can we help foster an environment that brings younger people into the fold and makes them actually participate in some of the things that just go beyond, work. There's an extension that I think younger people are looking for that are more intrinsic and non-tangible values that they're looking for out of their employer. When we look at kind of the types of companies of where people want to work at, I think, this data point is interesting. We see almost an even split between, public companies, large private enterprises, and kind of those small, medium-sized companies, 27, 24, 23%. But what sticks out to me is that 13% of folks who say they would want to be self-employed worker. And I can, when I think about that, I think about the gig economy. I think about freelancing. I think about individuals who have skills and they want to be able to market them outside of working for a company. That's important. And I think that kind of segment of younger people is only going to continue to grow as the nature of work changes. 23% in that small, medium-sized business or startup. When I think about the proportion that wants to work in there, these enterprises tend to have kind of that social enterprise, social mentality at the forefront, corporate social responsibility at the forefront, contributing or making an impactful way to causes that young people might care about. So that's why there's such a huge, I think, force behind that 23%. But there's still a sizable proportion that would want to work in a large public and private company. So, this poses the question, what can these institutions do to ensure that they're fostering a climate where young people feel a part of and feel like they're making a contribution? So we've been seeing kind of why people, or some of the reasons why people are feeling they need to leave. Let's talk about how to retain them. So we asked kind of what are the enticing benefits companies can offer their employees, and at the top, obviously, good salary, job security, and benefits. I think that goes without saying. Everyone's looking for those kinds of things, and more so for young people, they're looking for that security. So if we can check those two boxes off, then I think we have a foot in the door. But the difference between millennials and some of the older generations is more of the intangible stuff. So a flexible schedule that they're in control of. They want to feel that they're in control of their own hours. They want to feel that they're able to do work to a certain degree on their own terms. They want a healthy and supportive work environment. I think in part the pandemic has helped bolster this to the forefront, managing some issues that they're facing at home, managing some issues that they're facing, as a result of working so much. I think, this has come up to be one of the top priorities. And that also lends into the fact that they want a balance between their professional and personal life. So organizations really need to work hard to ensure that they're offering stuff beyond just a salary and a dental plan. You need to be ensuring that you're working hard to, meet some of the other needs that are going on in some of your employees' lives.
All right, thanks, Nick. So this word, flexibility. No one on this call, I can probably guarantee, is surprised to see that this is something that's critical when we're discussing, thinking, talking about millennials. Flexibility really in any aspect of their life is important. So let's dive a little bit deeper into what that actually means in terms of employing youth. So what does the flexible schedule look like? Everything I want to discuss here probably isn't new information for anybody. And if you've been following along in our webinars, it won't be surprising, everything will connect. And as Nick has already discussed, COVID really kind of fast-tracked this remote working, flexible environment that millennials have been asking for, prior to COVID as well. And it's really opened up businesses, it's opened up opportunities, and it's really opened up the landscape of competition, as Nick also discussed earlier. So with that, a whole new issue now is born for employers. Now that you're more flexible, well, so is everybody else. So now the competition has expanded past your own backyard, and there's a lot of other, people reaching out, opportunities available to employees, even further away than, even provincial barriers may have more traditionally kind of separated the competition lines previously. So really, all in all, as I've already said over and over, that flexibility is really what is key here for millennials and Gen Zers, but it goes beyond just flexible hours. So sure, 79% are telling us they want the less traditional work schedule, but what we also found is that it can look perhaps, a few ways. So here's 3 key ways that they could probably, would like to see their schedules adjusted. They have a perception that perhaps the schedule could be less about having a specific schedule in place and more about just getting the hours in, however those hours may fall. Just hit the certain number, however it may be. You can work 7 days a week, you can work 3 days a week, whatever the combination would work best for them. Or we remove hours completely from the equation and we just focus on specified tasks and objectives. Now, this is something that was interesting, more favored, or not more favored, but generally more stable millennials indicated that this was a model that was attractive to them. Again, perhaps this is influenced by their longer employment, more confidence in their abilities, a little bit more stable in what they're doing with their careers. But there is the talk and there is the thoughts around, let's remove hours altogether and just focus on what I need to get done. And if that gets done, then let's call it a day. And in terms of the hours, going back to the hours, we also see that perhaps we work 8 hours in a day, but as Nick went over in that, non-linear now equation of the work day, 8 hours, but whenever works for you, just as long as you get those 8 hours in. So overall, the majority of millennials feel that they're able to do the same amount of work as previous generations or as anybody else in their company and in the workforce, regardless of the number of the days that they actually work. So how do we make that attractive? How do we make ourselves as employers attractive to these young employees? So if you want to attract youth today, flexibility is key. And 45% there say that, flexibility is an incentive for them to consider a company for employment. But what we think is even more interesting, and kind of push flexibility aside for a minute, the other top 4 factors there of the 14 incentives that we actually tested among millennials is they're looking for employees they're looking to be able to accumulate additional hours as time credit to be used at a later date. They're looking for paid professional development. They're very motivated by personal growth and continued learning. They're working whenever they want. This just goes back to the slides that we just went over in flexibility and kind of ties into the flexibility schedule, but takes it one step further. That's, kind of takes schedule out of the equation and just put that onus on the young employee. And then reimbursements to travel to and from work. So a little more incentive there. Perhaps that could look like paid transit passes, a paid parking, mileage coverage, whatever that combination may be. It's definitely an attractive incentive among young employees. So overall, as we discussed earlier, the value of that youth is placing a lot of value in not only monetary reimbursements, but personal and professional growth as well. And that ties into their desires for advancements. So we asked millennials, how often do you think a company should offer you? And then we listed them some different variables here. So 72%, salary increase every year. probably doesn't shock anybody. That's one of the main reasons that any of us go to work every day. You know, I'm sure most of us could probably think of better ways that we'd like to spend 35 plus years of our life rather than clocking in 5 days a week to work 8 hours a day. And going beyond that, we then see the new challenges and new responsibilities. So 52% of youth want to see those new challenges, new responsibilities every year. They really have that hunger and desire, again, for that personal growth, personal development. And then further on, you know, promotion, we see 27%, new workplace, 10%, not as important to them. But coming in third, there's the new technologies and new tools that companies are offering them, which just is the desire to stay on top of things and how advanced they are and how adaptable they are to new technologies that could help them help you as employers. So as noted earlier, remote work and the desire for remote work is making competition even more intense and cutthroat. So much so that 22% of the youth that we surveyed indicated that they would leave their job immediately if they were forced to return to the office 5 days a week. So there's that, while it's, you know, 1 in 5, that's still a big proportion of your employees that don't want to be forced back into that situation. Further to that, we see that 27% identify working where they want as an attractive incentives companies can offer. So again, falling back to that flexibility, really that opportunity to let them have a little bit more say over their environment and in how they get things done, and in how you can help them get things done. And we're seeing these higher among the 30 and older millennials, and this could be in response to where they are in their current life stage. So as a 30 and up millennial, I can say confidently and from my own personal experiences that the flexibility of being able to work remote over these past nearly 2 years now has really allowed me to feel like a super mom, for lack of a better word. I have 3 young kids. I'm now able to drop them off at school. I can have conversations with the moms outside at drop off that I never would have been able to have had I been at work earlier and my kids be busing to work. It also has given me the opportunity to put them in various extracurricular activities so that we're out of the house every night of the week, because I'm saving commuting time from getting from downtown Edmonton to my home, and really giving me that, you know, flexibility. And although it's exhausting and at times I'm questioning my life choices almost on a daily basis, but that would not have been possible, and my family wouldn't have the opportunities that we currently have had it not been for remote work and flexible schedule that my employer has provided me. And I know as a working mom, I'm very grateful for that. And I'm sure anyone, even if they're not a working parent, is flexible or grateful, sorry, for the flexibility to be able to do other things that are important to them. So I can personally attest that as a 30 to 39-year-old millennial, the flexible work model has provided me better work-life balance, better lifestyle habits, has allowed for a more flexible schedule for life in general, and all while allowing me to be more efficient. And don't get me wrong, I miss my colleagues and I want to see everybody. And I would love to get back to the point that we can all be in the office at least a couple days a week for that social interaction. But I really do appreciate being able to, you know, throw that load of laundry in between Zoom calls, rather than trying to fit everything into my already crazy weekends. So why are youth leaving? Why is this great resignation happening? So 40% believe that their current employer is too corporate and not agile enough. 37% believe that their current employer is not ecologically responsible enough. 35% believe that their current employer is not responsive. Sorry. And there's one of the drawbacks of working from home. Sorry, everybody. And 31% believe that their current employer does not provide enough work-life balance. So they don't feel the ability to disconnect, which is something that I think a lot of us can attest to. I mean, you wake up in the morning, you go down your stairs, and you're bypassing your computer that may be dinging, or you have your phone available that says you have emails, so you're checking it before you even get your cup of coffee and get changed for the morning. 29% believe that their current employer is not sensitive enough to their mental health issues. So I'm just going to skip ahead to the next slide here, and then I'll come back. This slide is something that we've shown in all three of our webinars. So 21% of youth have indicated that they have experienced major depression. 39% have indicated that they experienced moments of depression. 48% indicate that they have had periods of anxiety. So what does all that mean? That means that 69% of youth have experienced symptoms related to their mental health, which really means that the majority of your employees have experienced them too. And they really need to know what supports are available and how you're there to support them through these challenges that they're facing. So going back to this slide now, we see that 18% feel that they're not inclusive enough, and 17% would like to see more equality between men and women within their work environment. So these are all points that employers currently can address, take a look at, see perhaps how things can be improved or perhaps better messaged to potential employees. But these are important things that youth look for in their employer that some currently feel that they're not receiving.
So I think also it's important to look at what young people perceive a company's objectives to be. And I think, what was interesting with this question was that generate profits was a number one. In this list of attributes that we asked, number one is improve its employees' quality of life. Almost half of young people that we surveyed said that that's the company's objective. I mean, there's also a focus on the customer experience, 39%, generating profits, 37%, innovative and developing new products, 34%, and 31% creating jobs. So when we think about the fact that young people really believe it's the company's objective to improve its employees' quality of life, I think the kind of stuff that Allison had just spoken about in terms of flexibility and then beyond what else related to that can employers do really comes to the forefront here in terms of what employers should be doing to help address and navigate this whole great resignation crisis when it pertains to kind of young workers. And I think this can all be, when we look at the data from the previous side, this all goes to the beyond profit kind of theme. Younger generations, they want to embody the change. So that might be, some social causes that are near and dear to them. They want to be working for a company that has this as part of their mission or has, programs that are related to this so that they can feel like they're contributing and living the values that they believe in. But despite embodying this change, the fears, the kind of lack of confidence in the job market overall, it's really causing a need to kind of change the world on a smaller scale. What are the things we can control right now? What are the things that I can contribute to make an impact right now? And I think, improving, there's a feeling among young people that they want to focus on the local, the ability to control the current world that they have. And so for them, it might be, working for companies that are having some sort of impact on the ground in their local community. There's this desire to change that world on a smaller scale. So there are kind of three strategic recommendations that Alice and I have put together in terms of what all this data means. What do I do with it? And I think the first here that we have is that as an employer, when it comes to young people, you must be proactive. I mean, when we look at the fact that 2 in 5, a quarter want to leave right now, the change needs to happen right now. We need to be having these conversations and figuring out, okay, what are the things that we can do to address some of the concerns that our young employees have to improve that retention process, but also, hit upon increasing flexibility, ensuring that, we are providing a work model that makes sense in this current economy. And that brings us to the second point, the flexibility being at the center of their concerns. It needs to be a part of the package. It can't just be, this is a salary, this is, great for your career kind of thing. Young people are increasingly thinking beyond just those two things. They want to be able to have a good quality of life and have control of their hours. And that brings us to the third point. They want companies that allow them more freedom. The control of their own hours, the ability to set work on their own terms is probably at the forefront of the discussion here about how to be proactive. So thinking about ways to ensure that you're providing kind of those flexible work schedules will really become important for employers navigating the next year. And so that brings us kind of to the end of today's presentation. Anybody who signed up for the webinar, you will be receiving a report with all of our data that we presented today. Will be coming in the next few days, so stay tuned for that in your email box. And we would like to open up kind of the floor to any kind of questions and comments. I believe that there's a questions box on your screen, and we can kind of answer those questions. So thank you so much for your time. I think we do already have one question here.
We do have one, yeah. So do you have any insights into what young workers want or need in terms of managing family life and work? Example, how they manage children in addition to their careers, how they prioritize their time between work and family life. That is a great question, Sarah. Thank you for asking. I think we don't specifically ask, how do you split up your time or how, if you had to break it down ratio-wise or percentage-wise. But I really think it would vary so much between individuals depending on what their priorities are, what their interests are, that I think it would all just fall back to that point that we made about being flexible, giving them the freedom, kind of putting a little bit more of the work control and the hour schedule control back to the employee, to have them let you know as an employer what works best for their schedule. Having a specific schedule in mind or a specific kind of ratio for each type of person or age may not be possible just because we think that it would vary so greatly between the age groups. Do we know that the flexibility of workday, like working in evening, is due to a desire for that structure or a necessity caused by too much work? Good question, Emily. Maybe a little bit of both. Just from kind of other research and what we've seen in the data. Again, not one of the questions that we asked point blank, so we can't say with confidence if that would be the case, but definitely because they did note that some don't feel that they're able to disconnect or that their employer provides them the kind of security and confidence that they're able to disconnect from work, that it would probably be, again, a little bit of both. And if it's something that, some people are having a concern with, it would probably be a worthwhile avenue to explore, and how perhaps messaging can be targeted in that regard of how employers are able to support their employees in separating the work-life balance while remote working, which can be very difficult for people to do. Sorry, I lost track there. Did we ask any questions about flexibility, working remote in different time zones or countries? Good question, Alana, and no, we didn't, unfortunately. All right. Any more questions, everybody? Do you have some time? Oh, what about when your job requires you to be available to clients? That's an interesting question, Patricia. Thank you. So the question, sorry, I know I mumbled there. The question is about when your job, what about when your job requires you to be available to your clients? That would definitely then fall on the responsibility of the employer to know what is required and what is not required. I don't think personally that in-person requirements, if communicated clearly and noted when would be required and when not would be required, would necessarily be a downfall for youth. They would just want to know that information and then have a little bit of, say, control or freedom around when those situations would occur, or perhaps when they're not required in person, are they able to have the flexibility to be more remote outside of those responsibilities?
Yeah, and I think we were talking about this kind of in preparation for this. Like, what about the younger folks working in kind of more service-oriented industries, where obviously remote is not a possibility? And I think, what comes to mind then is the quality of life, the supportive work environment, kind of those aspects related to flexibility, related to the whole discussion about what can we do, that become more important than just, a flexible kind of schedule.
Mhm. Sarah asks, any insights on how other generations feel about flexible work schedules? Though you focus on how this is preferred by young workers, would it not also be preferable for other generations? Good question, Sarah. And while we don't specifically ask other generations that specific question, and Nicholas, maybe you have some perspectives on this too, but I know even thinking about our own office situation and thinking about, my other family members' situations where they've been all working and how they're perceiving the remote working, it really does vary. And in my opinion, the older generations perhaps still have a little bit of that old school mentality that while they're convinced and they see that people can be productive working remote, there's still something to be said about the physical presence in the office to really kind of bring everybody together and foster that work culture and work community. And there's still the benefits that remote working will never be able to replace between, in-person interactions with colleagues, whether that's onboarding or training opportunities, connections, and kind of that teamwork mentality and really building that culture. I think that that's where the older generations may have stronger views that that's not something that remote working would ever be able to replace. I was also thinking about the flexibility to work when it suits you. Sorry, was that in regards to your last question, Patricia? What about, oh, okay, she's saying yes. Okay, so I'm assuming that you mean in terms of being able to kind of pick and choose when you have those client meetings and those in-person interactions? I'm assuming the yes will carry over from that. Yeah, I definitely sort of, sorry, Patricia, very hard over chat. I think if you're thinking about, allowing youth to dictate their schedule completely, even in regard to when they come in person or when they have their client meetings, if that's something that's possible within the organization, then definitely, of course, that would be, appreciated, or they would be open to it and really entice them. But if it's something that's more organization driven or client driven, I don't know if that would be a deterrent for someone, as long as it's clearly communicated up front and what's expected and what their roles would be. Do you have any suggestions on how employer can allow flexibility in work and measure accomplishments done to meet organizational goals? Oh, Cynthia, that is a wonderful question, and I wish we had the solid answer for you on that. I think every organization and every employer is still trying to navigate that minefield and really try to figure out the best practices on that. Of course, there's frequent team meetings through Zoom, There's different ways that you can track progress on task accomplishment, but through the research that we've done, I can't say that we have any specified best practices that we can offer, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting to see 30% don't trust large public or private companies. However, see more than half of those surveyed would still prefer to work for a public or large private company. Any insight into the reason for this conflict, despite lack of trust? Are these the companies that provide the most benefits and flexibility?
Yeah, I think, it's an interesting question. I think, when we look at the context from some of our previous webinars about young people not necessarily feeling secure in their future, at the end of the day, it's primarily probably private and big public organizations that provide that sense of security, right? These are longstanding institutions that have been around. Just because an individual doesn't trust them as much doesn't mean that, from an individual standpoint, as a young worker, that I wouldn't be open to working for an organization like that. I think what young people are looking at when we think about that trust score is more so related to, are they meeting some of the things that I see important? So, environmental stewardship for one thing. How active are they involved in some of the social causes that I care about? I think that's where we see more so the distrust come into play. Not so much as, is this a place that I wouldn't want to work at because I don't trust them. It might be, there are other factors that I think young people would want to consider going to when thinking about going to one of those big public or private organizations.
And then we have any data on volunteerism. Great question, and something that would be very interesting to follow up with perhaps next year's study, especially seeing how motivated and how in tune the youth are with social issues, and aspects in regards to those types of values. So definitely something we can consider adding in for future iterations. Unfortunately, we don't have the data for this year, and I think with COVID, it'd be interesting to see if we did have the tracking data. I'm sure COVID would have had a factor into any of those numbers that we would be seeing currently. Is there any insight into millennials and Gen Zers wanting more mental health benefits from an employer? You want to take that one, Nicholas?
Yeah, I don't know that we asked kind of general questions around mental health support. I think it goes into the discussion about quality of life. Young people want more resources just beyond what employers are currently providing, and I think part of that is in the discussion about fostering an environment where perhaps this is something that's discussed more openly. Certainly throughout the pandemic, I think that the discussion has accelerated way more than what was in the past. And we kind of touched on that as well previously and in this webinar, kind of what the current anxieties young people have with regard to their kind of mental health, kind of depression, stuff like that. So I think that, employers are more attuned to this in terms of trying to figure out what can our offering be on that. And I think it really boils down to that discussion about work-life balance, kind of that quality of life discussion that employers need to start having with young workers.
We have, has the percentage of people looking for more flexible hours changed significantly over the course of COVID? Or is this a persistent long-term trend we've seen with the shift from a single income to two income household over time? Both parents working rather than just one breadwinner. Great question, David. Not sure we have enough on hand currently to confidently say if that is true or not, or what our perception of that would be, other than definitely think that COVID has accelerated the desire and accelerated the change, and possibly, I don't know if I would say that it's maybe significantly increased over COVID. I think it's kind of just more maybe become the norm. But unfortunately, we just don't have enough with the data that we currently have to confidently give an answer for that one. But that's a great question. To clarify, when you discussed millennials' views on companies' objectives, was that based on how they see current companies functioning, or more aspirational, how they would like to see companies operate and prioritize? Do you have a sense of how closely current objectives align with what they would hope to see?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, when we asked that question, it was about kind of what they perceive a company's objective to be. So to a certain extent, it would be aspirational. I think, if we were to I don't think we asked in terms of what the current perceptions are, other than kind of looking at, the hierarchical kind of stuff, these kinds of negative perceptions of what organizations are, or sorry, big companies are today. So I'd say that, because of the kind of the way we asked it is a bit different, it's hard to see that, these aspirational views on what a company's objectives are, what they see a company's objectives to be, whether or not that would be against their current perceptions. So definitely would include something like that to measure aspirational versus current in the next iteration.
Okay. So we'll wait another minute and then potentially give everyone 5 minutes of their morning and afternoon back. Any last questions? Well, thank you, everybody, and thank you for the wonderful questions. Thank you for being so engaged. We really hope that you enjoy the presentation, and if you've been with us through the last 3 weeks, thank you, and we hope that it was interesting and informative and that you enjoyed it. As Nicholas mentioned, the report will be in your inboxes within the next few days here. We want to thank you all again for registering, taking the time. Have a wonderful rest of your Thursday, and happy holidays, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.